August 8, 1969. Four young people arrive at a mansion in the Hollywood Hills, carrying knives and rope. They believe they're about to save the world, not from invasion, not from disease. They're here to start a race war. They believe the Beatles are prophets. They believe a song about a playground slide contains coded instructions for the apocalypse. They believe that when they write "pig" in their victim's blood tonight, Black Americans will rise up and slaughter every white person in the country, except them. They believe the race war is prophesied in the Book of Revelation. They believe the Beatles recorded the White Album specifically to send them, personally, a message about when to strike. And they believe that brutal, ritualistic murder is the most moral thing they can do. The man who convinced them of this, a failed musician named Charles Manson, a career criminal who'd spent more than half his life in prison, a nobody who wanted to be bigger than the Beatles. By morning, 5 people would be dead, and the killers would return to their ranch, convinced they'd just fulfilled scripture. This is the story of the Manson family, and how a song about a playground slide became the soundtrack to slaughter. Charles Manson spent more than half his life in institutions before he was released in 1967. He was 32 years old. He'd been inside since he was a child. Reform schools, federal prison, parole violations that sent him back again and again. When the doors finally opened, he walked into San Francisco during the Summer of Love. The city was full of runaways, dropouts, and young people looking for meaning. Manson didn't arrive with a manifesto. He arrived with a guitar and a smile. His pitch wasn't violence. It was belonging. He told broken kids they were beautiful. He told lost girls they were goddesses. He offered a family to people who'd been abandoned by their own. And in 1967, in Haight-Ashbury, that was enough. The early family was built on vulnerability. Runaways, college dropouts, young women fleeing abusive homes. Manson found them at their lowest and promised them transcendence. He played music. He shared LSD. He spoke about love and freedom and a world beyond the establishment's control. But there was a method beneath the mysticism. Manson used acid to make reality fluid. He used sleep deprivation to prevent critical thinking. He isolated his followers from their families, their old names, their former selves. Susan Atkins became Sadie Mae Glutz. Patricia Krenwinkel became Katie. They weren't just joining a commune. They were being erased and rebuilt. And Manson positioned himself at the center of it all. He told them he was Jesus Christ returned, the 5th angel from the Book of Revelation, the one who would lead the chosen through the coming apocalypse. At first, it sounded like the ramblings of every other guru in California. Peace, love, enlightenment. But by 1968, the message had shifted. The family moved from San Francisco to a ranch outside Los Angeles, Spahn Ranch, a decaying Western movie set where an elderly owner let them stay in exchange for labor and companionship. The women did chores, the men prepared vehicles, and Manson began talking about something he called Helter Skelter. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a prophecy. And it was coming fast. Manson spent hours around campfires, interpreting the Beatles' White Album and the Book of Revelation. He told his followers that the Beatles were prophets, that their songs contained hidden instructions, and that the apocalypse was encoded in the music. The race war was imminent. Black Americans would rise up and slaughter whites in revenge for centuries of oppression. The establishment would fall, cities would burn, and the family? They would survive. They would hide in a secret city beneath Death Valley, a place Manson called the bottomless pit, and wait out the chaos. When they emerged, they would rule. The logic was twisted. The theology was incoherent, but the followers believed him because by that point, they'd already given up the ability to think for themselves. November 1968. The Beatles released a double album with a plain white cover. No title, no art, just blank space. Charles Manson played it obsessively. He heard what no one else could hear. Hidden messages, secret instructions, a blueprint for the end of the world. The album wasn't just music, It was scripture, and Manson was the only one who could decode it. He gathered the family around campfires at Span Ranch and played the songs over and over. He pointed out lyrics. He explained meanings. He connected the Beatles' words to passages in Revelation, chapter 9. Blackbird wasn't about a bird. It was about black Americans rising up against whites. Piggies wasn't satire. It was a prophecy about the establishment getting a damn good whacking. Revolution 9 wasn't an experimental sound collage. It was chapter 9 of Revelation, the family's instruction manual. And Helter Skelter, that was the name of the war itself, the chaos coming down fast. Paul Watkins, one of Manson's most devoted followers, later testified that Manson spent hours interpreting Revelation around those campfires. He described locusts with faces of men and hair like women, obviously the Beatles. He spoke of angels with breastplates of fire, their electric guitars. He decoded every verse, every symbol, every cryptic line. The Beatles, Manson said, were prophets. They knew the truth. They were calling out to him, to Charlie, because he was the fifth angel, the one who would lead the chosen people into the bottomless pit and out the other side. The family listened, and they believed, because the music spoke to them. On acid, the White Album became a living thing. The songs bled into each other, the lyrics twisted and reformed, and Manson's interpretations started to feel like revelations. Susan Atkins said later that it was uncanny. For weeks, Manson had been talking about revolution and prophecy. Then the Beatles released an album that seemed to confirm everything he'd been saying. It felt like proof, but there was a problem. By summer 1969, the race war hadn't started. Manson had been preaching Helter Skelter for months. The family had prepared. They'd gathered supplies. They'd mapped escape routes to Death Valley. They'd modified dune buggies for desert warfare. They'd even rehearsed their roles. Who would fight? Who would carry supplies? Who would care for the children they'd rescue from the chaos? But nothing was happening. Black Americans weren't rising up. The establishment wasn't falling. The prophecy was stalling. And Manson had an explanation for that too. Blackie never did anything without Whitey showing him how. He told Paul Watkins, the black militants needed a spark. They needed an example. They needed someone to show them how to start the war. Helter Skelter was ready to happen. The Beatles had given the instructions. Revelation had laid out the plan. But it looked like the family was going to have to show them how to do it. Prophecy required action, and action required soldiers willing to kill. Manson didn't just preach prophecy. He engineered obedience. The psychological architecture of the family was built on systematic destruction. Manson didn't ask his followers to believe in Helter Skelter. He made it impossible for them to think anything else. The method was precise. Constant LSD use during family meetings made reality negotiable. Sleep deprivation kept them exhausted and compliant. Public humiliation exercises destroyed whatever self-worth they had left. Manson would single out followers in front of the group, mock them, degrade them, force them to confess imaginary sins. He called it ego death. It was erasure. The family lived isolated at Span Ranch, cut off from newspapers, television, and contact with their old lives. The outside world became abstract. The only reality that mattered was the one Manson created. He controlled everything. Who ate, who slept with whom, who received approval, and who was cast out. The women performed all domestic labor. The men prepared for war. And Manson sat at the center, rewriting their identities, one brutal lesson at a time. Susan Atkins became Sadie Mae Glutz. Patricia Krenwinkel became Katie. Charles Watson became Tex. The renaming wasn't symbolic, it was tactical. Every old identity had to be severed, so the new one, the one that served Manson, could take root. And then came the reframing. Manson didn't tell his followers they were going to commit murder. He told them they were going to save the world. The killings weren't violence, they were necessity. They were revolution. They were the spark that would ignite Helter Skelter and fulfill the prophecy the Beatles had delivered. Susan Atkins testified later that she genuinely believed they were helping people. "We thought we were doing something to help the world," she said. Starting the race war wasn't destruction, it was completion. The world's karma had to be finished, and the family had been chosen to finish it. That's the mechanism of bounded choice. The followers believed they were making a decision. They believed they had agency, but every option that didn't serve Manson had already been eliminated. Linda Kasabian, who drove the car on the night of the Tate murders, said she felt trapped. She was terrified, but leaving wasn't an option she could see anymore. The family was her reality. Manson was her God. And the prophecy was the only truth she had left. Manson never gave explicit orders. He spoke in riddles and implications. He created a psychological environment where his followers would do what needed to be done without being told. Tex Watson later recounted that Manson told him to go to the house on Cielo Drive and do what needs to be done. That was it. No specifics, no instructions. But Watson knew exactly what Manson meant. The night before the murders, Manson told the family, "Now is the time for Helter Skelter." He selected his strike team: Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, Kasabian. They weren't chosen at random. They were chosen because Manson knew they would obey. They had been broken down, rebuilt, and programmed. They believed the prophecy. They believed in the mission. And they believed that murder was the most moral thing they could do. That's the enduring horror of the Manson family. The followers weren't mindless. They were convinced. They had reasons. They had a framework. They had a prophet who told them that killing strangers in their homes was an act of salvation. On the night of August 8, 1969, the prophecy moved from theory to blood. August 8, 1969. Just after midnight, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian climbed into a car and drove toward the Hollywood Hills. Their destination was 10050 Cielo Drive, a secluded mansion that had once belonged to Terry Melcher, the music producer who'd rejected Charles Manson months earlier. Manson knew the house. He'd been there before. He knew the layout. He knew how isolated it was. By August, the house belonged to director Roman Polanski and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. Polanski was in Europe. Tate was home, 8.5 months pregnant. Watson had been given his orders. Manson told him to take the women, go to the house, and do what needs to be done. He told the women to do whatever Tex said. That was all the instruction they needed. When they arrived, Watson climbed a telephone pole near the gate and cut the phone line. Then the group abandoned the car at the bottom of the hill and walked back up, climbing over the fence to avoid the electronic gate. As they approached the house, headlights appeared from inside the property. Watson ordered the women into the bushes. A white car rolled toward them, a teenager named Stephen Parent, leaving after visiting the caretaker in the guest house. Watson stepped into the driveway and leveled a revolver at the boy. Parent begged. He said he wouldn't tell anyone. He promised he'd stay quiet. Watson shot him 4 times in the chest. The first victim, 18 years old. He died in the front seat of his car. The group pushed the car up the driveway. Then Watson cut the window screen and climbed inside, letting Atkins and Krenwinkel in through the front door. Kasabian stayed outside by the gate, as ordered. Inside, Watson found Wojciech Frykowski asleep on the couch. He kicked him in the head and announced, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." Atkins and Krenwinkel found the other occupants: Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, and Abigail Folger. Watson forced them into the living room at gunpoint. He tied Tate and Sebring together by their necks with a nylon rope and slung it over a ceiling beam. When Sebring protested the treatment of the pregnant Tate, Watson shot him. Then, he stabbed him 7 times. Frykowski, whose hands had been loosely bound, broke free and fought his way toward the front door. Watson caught him on the porch, beat him with the gun, and stabbed him repeatedly. He shot him twice. Frykowski died on the lawn with 51 stab wounds. Folger escaped from Krenwinkel and ran for the pool. Krenwinkel tackled her on the front lawn. Watson joined in. Together, they stabbed her 28 times. Inside, Tate begged to be allowed to live long enough to give birth. She offered herself as a hostage. She pleaded for her baby. Atkins and Watson stabbed her 16 times. She died still, suspended by the rope. Before they left, Atkins used Tate's blood to write "pig" on the front door. When the group returned to Spahn Ranch, Manson asked Watson, "Was it really Helter Skelter?" Watson assured him it was, but Manson wasn't satisfied. The first night hadn't been brutal enough. It hadn't been theatrical enough. The message needed to be clearer. The next night, August 9, Manson personally drove the group to a second location, the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in Los Feliz. This time, Manson entered the house first. He tied up the couple himself, then sent Watson, Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten inside to finish the job. Watson stabbed Leno LaBianca 12 times with a bayonet. He carved the word "war" into his abdomen. Krenwinkel and Van Houten went to the bedroom, where Rosemary had been bound. Van Houten stabbed her 16 times. Krenwinkel added more. Rosemary LaBianca received 41 stab wounds. Many were inflicted after she was already dead. When they were finished, Krenwinkel used the victim's blood to write messages across the walls. "Rise, death to pigs." And on the refrigerator door, "Helter Skelter," misspelled, but unmistakable. She left a carving fork jutting from Leno LaBianca's stomach. The family believed they had started the war. They returned to the ranch and waited for the black uprising that would confirm the prophecy. It never came. The race war was always a delusion. But the murders were real, and the belief that drove them was real. Manson didn't need a true prophecy. He just needed people desperate enough to believe him. The trial began in 1970. Manson carved an X into his forehead. The women followed. By the time the verdict came, the X had become a swastika. The prosecution's case wasn't about insanity, it was about conspiracy. Vincent Bugliosi argued that Helter Skelter wasn't a delusion. It was the motive, the ideology that bound the family together and justified the slaughter. Manson's defense was simple. Helter Skelter is confusion. It's not my conspiracy. But the jury didn't buy it. Conviction on all counts. The prophecy couldn't save him. And yet, the mechanics that created the Manson family never disappeared. They just evolved. The warning signs are the same today. A leader who claims special knowledge, isolation from outside information, the reframing of reality so that harm becomes necessary, the promise that you're part of the chosen, the enlightened, the saved. You see it in QAnon's Great Awakening, another race war prophecy, another promise of a hidden truth only the faithful can see. You see it in wellness gurus who weaponize trauma and promise enlightenment through total obedience. You see it in crypto communities that isolate members from skeptics and frame financial ruin as a test of faith. The tactics don't change. The technology does. Manson used LSD and campfire sermons. Modern cult leaders use algorithms and Discord servers. But the result is the same. A bounded reality where the only moral choice is the one the leader has already decided for you. The Manson family's tragedy wasn't that they were stupid. It was that they were convinced. They had reasons. They had a framework. They believed murder was salvation. That's the lesson. The most dangerous cults don't ask you to abandon your morals. They convince you that destruction is moral, that violence is love, that prophecy justifies blood. Helter Skelter never happened. The race war was always a lie, but the murders were real. And the belief that drove them was real. The machinery that created the Manson family didn't die with Charles Manson. It just found new platforms. You've seen it recently. You might be seeing it right now. QAnon followers believe in the storm, another apocalyptic prophecy, another race war scenario, Another promise that the faithful will be vindicated when the truth is finally revealed. They're told they have special knowledge. They're isolated from normies who can't see what they see, and violence becomes justified as patriotism. Crypto communities isolate members in Discord servers, reframe financial losses as diamond hands, and promise that only the true believers will survive the coming collapse of fiat currency. Skeptics are shills. Doubt is weakness. The prophecy is always just around the corner. Wellness gurus weaponize trauma, promise enlightenment through total obedience, and convince followers that cutting off family members is protecting your energy. Harm becomes self-care. Exploitation becomes healing. And the guru is the only one who truly understands. The tactics haven't changed. The technology has. Manson used LSD and campfire sermons to create a bounded reality. Modern cult leaders use algorithms and echo chambers. So here's the question: can you spot where the isolation happens? Where harm gets reframed as necessary? Where the leader positions themselves as the only source of truth? Because the Manson family's tragedy wasn't that they were stupid, it was that they were convinced. They had reasons. They had a framework. They believed murder was salvation, and they never saw it coming. The machinery is still running. Different prophet, different prophecy, same result. But you don't have to imagine what a modern cult looks like. You can watch one forming in real time. Her name is Teal Swan. She calls herself a spiritual catalyst. Her followers call her a suicide prevention expert. Her critics call her dangerous. She has millions of followers. She teaches workshops on trauma healing, and she tells suicidal followers that death might be their reset button. Manson used campfires and LSD. Teal Swan uses YouTube and Instagram. But the machinery is identical. Isolation, reframing harm as healing, positioning herself as the only one who truly understands. The difference? Her cult doesn't hide in the desert. It lives in your algorithm. Next, we're going inside Teal Swan's world. How she builds devotion through trauma. Why her followers defend her even after people die. And what happens when the prophet has a Ring camera recording everything. Because awareness isn't just armor. It's the only way out.